This is the final leg of the F3 Sydney ferry service to Parramatta from Rydalmere Wharf, which we are just leaving now, to Parramatta Wharf. Arguably, this is probably the longest leg of the service. It takes around 15 minutes or more, depending on the tides, the wind, and all sorts of conditions, but there is a 10-knot limit here in place. We are now just passing Reid Park, or an extension of the Eric Primrose Reserve, which is supposed to run from Silverwater Bridge to Rydalmere Wharf, and from here onwards it's supposed to be Reid Park. So I've just put both places in. The bike path that you see there on the northern side, on the right hand side, is part of the Parramatta River Cycleway. So they are trying to build all sorts of cycleways here in the city, hugging along the foreshore. And that would be great if they could continue that. We are now just passing Thackeray Street Water Bridge. So this was built in 1936 and it's supposed to transport water from the reservoir at Potts Hill down south over to Rydalmere. According to the Parramatta Heritage website, that used to be a former wharf. There are lots of former wharves along the river, just because before all the roads were built and constructed, the river was the main form of transportation of people, of goods. And there on the northern side, or on the right side, is Rydalmere Industrial Estate, hidden by the mangroves. It's a long area, a rather big area of industrial buildings and factories. And here I was trying to figure out which creek this was, and I'm guessing it is Subiaco Creek. Subiaco was a great estate, and its last owners were a group of nuns, so that's where Subiaco comes from, after that Italian town. But despite efforts in the 60s to ensure the estate remained intact, it was unfortunately demolished and is now the site of the Ream Industrial Estate. Similarly, Camellia on the southern end, or on the left-hand side, is also an industrial estate. James Hardy, the asbestos maker, is on that site, but the origins of Camellia does come from the flowers camellia. There was a landowner who used to grow camellias and would send them downriver to florists to the quay. So it is quite a stark contrast to think how this was agrarian in nature and now it's full of industry, and heavy industry there is. Camellia, as mentioned in the previous video, is going to be, or intended to be, another suburb. So there will be lots of growth along the river here. They are currently just doing rehabilitation now along the river, because this waterfront, or this riverfront reserve, is highly prized amongst Sydney's developers. I'm only focusing on the mangroves here because to know you are near the Subiaco Industrial Estate, there is an Australian candle maker, a very well-known one, called Glasshouse Fragrances, and their factory is located here. So I was just trying to figure out if this was actually Subiaco Creek here, but as opposed to the earlier version one. So I couldn't really see unless I droned this, but that's not legal. Anyway, not on board the Sydney Ferry. But as you can see, there's a lot of mangroves that grow on site. On the left-hand side, you can see some trucks there, so they're probably trying to remove some of the construction debris from the demolition out, because it is going to be earmarked as a new suburb. But now into view is Parramatta CBD, and you can see this is high density as intended by our governments. They do have a focus on supply. Sydney continues to grow, And really, its natural boundaries are the Blue Mountains and the rivers, Georges River maybe down in the south and Hawkesbury River on the north. So that kind of gives you an idea of how big Sydney is. It is a big sprawling metropolis. And we continue to have issues of supply just because the property prices in Sydney are very high. So we come around the river bend here, and the next creek that we come into view, and I do believe this is a creek, is Vineyard Creek. It was the site of another great estate. I'm not sure if it was Hannibal MacArthur's estate, but as the name suggests, they did grow vineyards, wine, grapes around here. So it is hard to imagine what it was when it was, but that is the origins of the creek in those colonial days. And now we come into view to the Carlingford to Parramatta Light Rail Bridge. They've built this light rail extension to replace the railway that used to run from Clyde to Carlingford. So when I filmed this footage, this used to be, this was still under testing. But now we come into view to the Western Sydney University campus there at Parramatta. It was also a heritage estate or a big parcel of land, but they have now handed it over to university, I suppose, to take care of it. And so we come into view of James Roos Drive, which is a main arterial road here. So this is the first road bridge we've come across in Silverwater Road Bridge. On the bottom of the pylons, you may see some sculptures, and I did film some footage of it on the way back. But those sculptures commemorate James Roos, who was a former convict turned agrarian or farm worker, which is the history of Australia in general. You've got human resources issues when you get sent to the other side of the world. But it was a pleasant penal colony in the end. Fur Home Reserve is there on the right-hand side. And now there's the maritime boat that we were following upriver. And I dare say they were just cleaning up the rubbish from around here. And behind that is this development called Top Place Riviera Development. And the developer behind it is Jean Nassif, who has now absconded to Lebanon because that particular development has a lot of defects. And so his property company has been seized. He's now a wanted fugitive. But that is so Sydney for you. There are all these developers who sometimes forget that you are there to fulfill a need of the population as opposed to their short-term self-interest. And so we view the Alfred Street Bridge, which is a shared bike and pedestrian path that crosses the river. So this is relatively new. It was opened last year. And I do wonder if it is high or tall enough to ensure that future ferries can go underneath it. But so far, so good. And so if you do take the Parramatta River Cycleway, this is a nice detour to just cross the river over this bridge. And into view, we see more of the buildings of Parramatta CBD. And this is quite a contrast when, say, you pull up to Barangaroo or Circular Quay. The waves are so much more turbulent, but here it is rather pleasant. And Harris Park is there on the left-hand side, and that park is called Queen's Wharf Reserve. So there would have been a wharf there sometime last century or the previous centuries before, but the wharf no longer exists there, so it's become a reserve. So it's good that they've kept parts of the river, not the entire river length, for all these parks and reserves. Ideally, one day, perhaps, one could go walking from Parramatta to the CBD the Sydney City CBD along the foreshore one day, maybe. There is a great emphasis on high density living here at Parramatta. So those two buildings that you see there are residential buildings. And now into view comes the Gasworks Bridge, which crosses MacArthur Street. And Parramatta is full of these historic bridges, these sandstone bridges, and they have withstood the test of time and the elements. And it is lovely to see some of this heritage still existing in Parramatta, although we've lost some of that heritage as well. We've not been able to keep them all. But kudos to those who tried to preserve some of this colonial heritage. And coming into view is this sculpture called the Sentry Box, and I was fascinated by it when I first saw it. It's supposed to recall the Redcoats, and this is a sculpture by Susan Milne and Greg Stonehouse. But if you have a look closely, the weapons are not weapons of war, but they're weapons of garden tools. So it is just perhaps a commentary on the convict versus soldier relationship. You are sent to the colonies, but the colonies lack human power, and so the convicts are turned into labour. Anyway, on the right side is the river boardwalk, and this again is part of the Parramatta River Cycleway. And this is really the end of the river service here. Here the ferry does a U-turn or a U-ey because it is being blocked further upriver by the weir. So there is Parramatta Weir, and as you can see, there's still further water course up there, and the source of Parramatta River is supposed to be Toongabbie Creek further up past Westmead and all that. But this is the ferry just turning to pick up passengers from Parramatta to the quay, and this is Parramatta Quay, which is quite a contrast to Circular Quay with its busyness, whereas here at Parramatta Quay you really can only have one ferry at a time because it is that small, being a river wharf. And this is where the journey ends, and I'll make the journey back from Parramatta to Circular Quay.